Welcome to Blyton Park in Lincolnshire. My name's Ian Gwynn and I own BGM Sport, and today we are here to showcase some of the cars that are owned by Steve Rimmer, owner of Dirtfish Rally School in the USA. As you can see, we've got a tremendous row of cars that we're going to drive, and I am getting really excited now to get in the cars and demonstrate what the cars will do. Group B, without doubt, the most dangerous era of rallying. Group B cars ran from 83 to the end of 86. Here we have the Ford RS200. Absolute monster of a car. These were running 650 horsepower back in the day. The car is created on a monocoque chassis. It's mid-engine, it has the gearbox in the front, which gives you really good even weight balance front to rear. This car is an absolute beast to drive. It's very agricultural, it's got all mechanical diffs, it feels very harsh and noisy when you drive the car, but what an experience. This car was driven by Stig Blomqvist, and only Stig Blomqvist, during the 1986 season. He did the Acropolis Rally. Unfortunately, he didn't finish that rally due to mechanical problems. And the last rally he did in it was the Lombard RAC Rally in 86, which indeed he led early on, but once again the car was plagued with mechanical problems which put him out of the rally. Four-wheel drive, in comparison to a modern car, very little suspension travel, brakes are fairly average, doesn't give you great traction on acceleration or under braking, which makes it a real man's car to drive properly. And I have nothing but admiration for the likes of Stig that drove this car back in the day. Their ability to drive these cars, it was absolutely immense, incredible. You compare this with a modern car today, they are much faster, they have much less power, but the chassis and the evolution of the suspension on the cars makes them so much faster. So here we have something a little bit different. This is a car that was commissioned by Ford USA for Marcus Grönholm to drive on the 2009 Pikes Peak event. The idea was that the car would be created for Marcus to do a sub 10 minutes run up the hill and actually win the class. He did actually fail to do that because they had some turbo issues with the car, but very exciting car. This is four-wheel drive, 800 horsepower. You imagine driving up the side of a mountain in America with 800 horsepower. Absolutely incredible. It's four-wheel drive, it has a 6-speed sequential gearbox, and absolute brute of a car to drive. I've driven it once before, and it really does take your breath away. We are not running at 800 horsepower, it's running at about 550, 600. Just to try and help preserve the car. But coming in at under 1,000 kilos with all that power, the power to weight ratio is absolutely amazing, and a truly fabulous car to drive. The Subaru Impreza WRC, one of the most iconic rally cars from the 90s in rallying. The cars were made synonymous by Colin McRae driving for the ProDrive World Rally team. In the early form he drove the Subaru Legacy RS, then moved on to the 555 Group A four-door Impreza, but this car is probably the most iconic and the most desirable of all of the Subaru World Rally cars. This is a 1999 car that was driven by Juha Kankkunen on the Rally New Zealand, where he finished second overall. It's a full factory spec, full original car, and one thing that really stands out with this car is the very vivid blue, the 555 blue World Rally Team colour with the fluorescent striping on the car. It really stands out. It's a fabulous car to drive. It's obviously four-wheel drive, which is what the World Rally cars were. It's flat 4 engine, 2 litre turbocharged. It gives around 330 horsepower. When Juha drove the car in '99, it would have had a paddle shift gear change, which basically has a lever by the steering wheel so you can change gears up and down. When the cars came out the factory, they came out with what we call a sequential gearbox, which is a regular stick, and you pull to go up the gears and then you push to go down the gears. They didn't release the full factory paddle shift system to any customers because they didn't want any other teams to see how they created that system. It was a very advanced system for its day. Very, very iconic. You know, rally fans all around the world really relate to this car. So the Skoda, I like this car a lot actually, because this is the very first car that Steve bought when he really decided that he wanted to create a collection of famous rally cars. So this car was purchased back in 2006, and Steve was introduced to me by an existing customer of mine who was a good friend of Steve's, and 15 years later, as we walk around, you'll see what's been created over the years. So the Skoda, this is an original factory-built car. They started the creation of this car way back in 1997 with ProDrive, which not many people know. They helped develop the car for Skoda. The cars ran in 2001, 2002 and 3. This particular car is the latest spec. It's an Evo 3, and the best result it achieved was in 2003 Turkey Rally with Tony Gardemeister, one of the factory drivers, driving the car on that event. So here we have a very special car, which is a Pikes Peak Ford Fiesta, which was built by and created by Olsbergs MSE in Sweden for Marcus Grönholm to drive at the Pikes Peak event in the open class in 2009. Their target for the event was to do a sub 10-minute run up the hill. There were some minor issues with the car and he didn't achieve that, but he did finish second overall in the open class. This car's based on basically on a rallycross car, and as you can see, they've added huge wing to the front, an even bigger wing to the rear. It's slightly unique with Ford's involvement. They wanted this car to be designed around the 5-door car, whereas normally competition cars are 3-door. This was done on the 5-door car because they wanted to promote it in America. 800 horsepower, 6-speed sequential gearbox. It's as angry to drive as it looks. It's an amazing car. So here we have really quite a unique car. There were very few of these factory Nissan Sunny F2 cars built. 2-litre, normally aspirated, front-wheel drive car. So quite different to the other Group A cars that were running in the era that this did in 1994. Tommy Mackinnon drove this car on 2 or 3 events in the British Rally Championship in '94. Won his class on the Scottish and the Ulster Rally. Also rallied the car on WRC Portugal. Didn't finish. Terrific cars. Nissan, Renault, Ford, Peugeot, they all had F2 cars back in the day, and they really were really tight battles with the teams with these cars because they were very, very similar in performance. So here we have a truly unique car, Henry Toivonen's 1980 Lombard RAC Rally winning car. The last 2-wheel drive car to win the Lombard RAC Rally. Henry Toivonen, as we all know, sadly lost his life in '86 in Corsica, driving the Lancia Delta S4. I love this car. This is kind of what I grew up with, rear-wheel drive, twin-cam engine on big carburetors. They make all the right noises, they're very sideways, and I have utter admiration for anybody that used to succeed at a high level in these cars. Purely because they're very basic. When you compare this to a modern car, it really is kind of just like a road car version in comparison to the modern cars. The roll cages are very basic, all the safety features are very basic, but they really, really drove the door handles off these cars. Absolutely amazing to watch. RS 1700T. This is a car that people in the know of rallying from the olden days will fully understand and get what this car is. A lot of people won't know what the car is because it is effectively a prototype. It's a car that Ford commissioned the rally team to build to kind of supersede the Ford Escort Mark II that was so successful in the World Rally Championship. They needed a car that was going to fight the other manufacturers that were out there doing the World Championship. This was it. It's got an 1800 BDT engine, which is basically a BDA twin cam engine, which is a similar unit that was used in the Mark II Escort. It's turbocharged. It has a transaxle in the rear, which basically means that the gearbox and the diff unit is all in one unit. An amazing car, but Audi came along with the 4-wheel drive car, and Ford instantly decided that they had to can this project because it was never ever going to compete with a 4-wheel drive car. This prototype series was then stopped, and then they moved on to the production of the RS200 Group B 4-wheel drive car. But a very, very special car. There is only 5 of these cars known in existence in the world, and this is one of them. What's to say about the great Colin McRae? This is one of Colin's cars that he drove when he drove for the M Sport World Rally team. The iconic livery of the Martini Focus is absolutely outstanding. This particular car is a car that Colin did 3 rallies in the World Championship, 2 rallies at the end of 2001. Then he actually did a couple of rallies in the car beginning of 2002, ultimately leading to a minor accident that he had in Corsica, which was the last rally it did, when he actually caught his finger on the roll cage down by the side of the steering wheel here and broke his finger. The car then got fully restored, and Steve ended up buying the car, I think in about 2010, and it's been used very little since. It gets used at demonstration events and at places like the Goodwood Festival of Speed, where we take a lot of the cars. But what a car. It's absolutely fabulous, and many people will remember Colin for driving not only the Focuses but the Subarus as well, which we'll come on to after. And indeed Ari Vatanen winning the World Rally Championship in one of these cars in 1981. This car was purchased probably around 7 or 8 years ago, and it's a car that we sometimes joke with Steve because we do need to restore it. It's a very famous car. Originally, there was a pair of cars that were built for the 1976 Monte Carlo Rally, which didn't sport this type of wheel arch. It had the squarer X-Pack wheel arches on. Quite unique, and we are going to restore it back to the original specification. Steve keeps asking me, when are we going to do it? And I keep saying, we'll do it when you stop buying more cars. So as you're seeing, we've got an age range of cars from relatively modern, 2017, down to this car, which is actually a 1966 Mark I Lotus Cortina. This car was built in 1990 by David Sutton Motorsport for Roger Clark to compete in some of the historic rallies in the UK. The UK Motorsport Association were keen on gaining momentum with historic rally cars and competing in a championship, which is what this car was built for. It's a beautiful car. It's absolutely original, and it's got lovely history. And in one particular part of the history that this car has is Roger Clark and Colin McRae did a TV film shoot with Top Gear, where they both drove each other's cars. So Colin drove this car and Roger drove Colin's what was then his current Subaru Legacy Group A Rothmans car. So it's got really nice history. There's video footage of this car on YouTube with both of them driving. Yeah, just a very pretty 60s car. The Ford Escort Mark I. This really put Ford on the map with their ability to create cars that were very successful in rallying. Another Roger Clark car. This was built for the 1970 RAC Rally, and I love these cars. Roger Clark was a big hero of mine when I was growing up as a youngster, and very inspiring for me. So Roger Clark was one of my childhood heroes, and very inspiring to me. We got this car for Steve late 2008, I think, and then we completely restored the car back to original. And it's one of the cars that he and James, his son, have actually spent some time driving, because we've got all these cars here, some of which they've driven, some they simply won't drive because of what the cars are, and you need to be a bit more understanding of how to drive them. But these more simple, what I would call mechanical cars, are very easy for them to drive. So we have done quite a few miles with them in the cars at different events, and they both love it. Renault 5 Turbo 1 Tour de Course. These were fire-breathing monsters back in the day. They have a 1400cc mid-engine, rear-wheel drive, and they were producing over 300 horsepower, which sounds kind of unrealistic because of the engine size, but when you think that Formula One cars back in the day, which were only 1500cc, were producing nearly 1000 horsepower. And it really is a special little car. It was built in period with proper factory Renault Tour de Course parts. It was very successful in France with a couple of different French drivers, and a wonderful addition to the collection. So BMW M3 Group A car. ProDrive built these cars as factory rally cars for BMW in the late 80s and early 90s. One of the most iconic rear-wheel drive cars that ever existed. High revving, 2.3 litre engine, and they were made so famous with the likes of Patrick Sniers and Mark Duez that used to drive these cars. Absolutely on the limit. When we purchased this car for Steve, we completely recommissioned the car, and it's one of the few cars, I've been lucky to drive a lot of cars. This is one of the few cars that I'd never ever driven. And trust me, I couldn't wait to drive it. It was just a dream. As a youngster and being involved in rallying, this is one of the cars that was key to try and get to drive. And boy, did it not let anybody down. It was just absolutely amazing. I've been lucky enough to drive it at a few events since. And it's extremely rare. There are very few of these cars left in this condition. This was actually a one-owner car prior to us purchasing. So as you see it now is as it left ProDrive in the early 90s. So here we have a super rare road car from Steve's collection, the Ford Escort Mark II RS 1800. This car was designed with the BDA 1800cc engine as a road car, purely for homologation purposes. Back in the day, people kind of discarded what they were because they're a basic Mark II Escort with the BDA engine in. But as time has gone by, all the cars that were actually produced have either been lost or damaged or reshelled, or the cars were turned into rally cars. There are very few of the road car versions left. We were lucky enough to find this car a few years ago for Steve and have recently restored it, and it's actually very soon going to travel by ship to America to be with Steve's other cars in Seattle. So here we have another Group B monster, the Ford RS 200. This car was created from the ground up. We discussed the RS 1700T earlier, and this is the car that followed the demise of the RS 1700T project. It was designed to challenge Peugeot, Audi and Lancia with their current four-wheel drive cars in the mid-80s. This car was going to be the car to beat in 1987. Group B was banned at the end of 1986 because the FIA deemed them to be too dangerous. With this being a monocoque and a honeycomb body, very agile, very, very lightweight, very low centre of gravity, mid-engine, this was going to be the car to beat by a long way. And they'd actually already developed the Evolution version, which would have been known as the RS200 Evo, for 87, but sadly it never ever got rallied. But what a piece of history. This car did 2 rallies with Stig Blomqvist as the works driver. It did the Acropolis Rally and the Lombard RSC Rally in 86. Sadly didn't finish either. But the car showed the speed and the potential that it had. So here we have another Group 4 car from the early 80s. Another car that would have competed with the Talbot Sunbeam Lotus that we saw earlier in the Ford Escort Mark II. This particular car was driven by Jimmy McRae as a factory car. Very similar layout to all the other cars from back in period. Front engine, rear wheel drive. This car really does hold something special in my heart because after Jimmy McRae drove the car in 1980, my dad then owned and campaigned the car during 1981 and 82. We were lucky enough to find the car in Ireland in the early 2000s and then spent many years restoring the car back to the condition that you see it in now. We also have the original Works Vauxhall Bedford CF service van, which is in exactly the same livery. Together they look absolutely amazing and very unique. And on that note, as we've moved forward and progressed with the restoration of the cars over the years, the idea of having an original service vehicle to go with the rally car is really appealing. And whenever we take the car to shows and they're together, it really does draw in a lot of attention. Here we have another McRae car, again another Jimmy McRae car, the Ford Sierra Cosworth, iconic in the late 80s. They really were fire-breathing, side exhaust, extremely noisy rally cars. This car was built commissioned by Ford to RED for them to build this car for Jimmy to compete, and the goal was to go and win the 1989 Autoglass Tour of Britain, which Jimmy did by almost half a minute. They were specifically built for the tour. It was run, I believe, over 5 days. It was a mixture of rally stages and some circuit racing, which proved very interesting, having rally drivers and rally cars on the racetrack. Jimmy actually won the event outright in this car by some margin. My father then looked after the car in 1990 for its then new owner, and he campaigned the car for half a dozen or so rallies in British UK forestry rallies, and then it just remained absolutely stagnant for 20 or so years. I purchased the car from him, restored the car, and then eventually a few years later I sold it to Steve to form part of his collection, because as you can see he does have quite a few older Ford rally cars. Colin McRae really brought these to the forefront of rallying. Not many people in this country actually knew what Subarus were in the early 90s, and then when Colin started to be successful in the cars, everybody wanted a Subaru. This particular one is one of the two-door World Rally cars that ProDrive built in the late 90s. This is actually a 99 car, driven by Juha Kankkunen to second overall in Rally New Zealand. Interesting story with this car is, in 2001, Richard Burns won the World Rally Championship for ProDrive and the Subaru World Rally team. In his contract, he was to be given a Subaru rally car as a gift, if you like, for winning the World Championship. He was given this car, but Richard never really had any kind of love affair with it because he never drove it, he never had anything to do with it. In fact, the car that he won the World Championship in was the later version, the four-door version to this. So more recently, although we've always known this ever since we've had it, which is about 15 years, we've always known it as the Burns car. More recently, we did some research and discovered that it was actually originally a Juha Kankkunen car, and now we've put it back into the original livery from New Zealand in '99. So who doesn't love a Subaru? The Subaru Legacy RS Group A car. We all remember Colin McRae driving these cars when he was a young man. Absolutely destroyed some cars just through his pure determination to get to the end of every stage as fast as he probably could. And he had many accidents. Not many people knew about the Subaru range in this country in particular until Colin started to drive them. This particular car is the car that he drove in '92 on the Swedish International Rally, where he finished second overall, and this was really his announcement to the world that he has now arrived on the WRC scene. Flat four engine, very synonymous noise from these cars from the flat four, four-wheel drive, and it was built by ProDrive to challenge the likes of Ford and Toyota and Lancia in the Group A era in the early 90s. Wonderful car and an absolute joy to drive. The Fiat 131R Bath Group 4 car. This car really was quite ahead of its time in the late 70s. The Ford Escort Mark II, the Sunbeam Lotus and the Chevette we spoke about all had live axles, solid rear axles in the back of the cars. This car had a fully independent, or has got a fully independent rear end, which gave the car a lot more traction, a lot more drivability, made them incredibly successful cars. The car was originally driven over 2 or 3 seasons by Marco Allen. It started life in this livery in '77, and then when it ended its life as a factory car, it was actually in the later Fiat colours, which were the two-tone blue. We decided that the best way to restore the car would be to put it back in its original Alitalia livery. So the Lancia 037 Group B. Mid-engine, rear-wheel drive. These cars were absolutely phenomenal on tarmac. They're like a little go-kart. They weren't so good on gravel, but they were competing at that time against some of the four-wheel drive cars, but on tarmac they were amazing. I particularly like these cars. Most of them that you see are in the Martini livery. They're very synonymous to have that livery on the cars. I like this one because it is in the Olio Fiat livery, and it just makes it a bit different. It makes it stand out a little bit more from the other cars. Best result with this car, it was driven by Fabrizio Tabaton on the 1984 San Remo rally when he finished 4th overall, and it was actually run by a private team, but beautiful, beautiful car. The Audi Quattro Sport S1 E2. I mean, the pinnacle of Group B. These were super fast cars. They sounded amazing and very distinct from any other car with a 5-cylinder engine. But as you walk around this car and see how it's evolved over the 3 or 4 years that they developed and ran the car, you've got the wings and you've got the winglets and everything just kind of almost screwed onto the car. And then when you start to look around the rear of the car, it's exactly the same. It's absolutely stunning to look at, and many, many people's favourite Group B car. These were producing, like most of the others, 600, 650 horsepower. This is the latest car that Steve has bought to go in the collection. The car arrived with us middle of December last year. Max Girardo, very, very good friend of mine, brokered the car deal and sold it to Steve. It lived in the Juha Kankkunen collection in Scandinavia for many years. Every year Max does a video of a special car with a Christmas tree on the roof. So between Max and I and Steve, we put a plan together to use Steve's new car to do the video, which I'm sure some people have seen online. It's out there on the internet to see. It was great fun to do. I had driven one of these cars when I was about 17, so 35 years ago. I drove a very, very similar car to this. In fact, it was a car that was owned by a chap called Tom Hammond, who used to own Steve's green Quattro Sport road car that he has in America. And I met Tom in the mid-80s. He used to tow, with his short wheelbase road car, he used to tow his rally car behind it. Never seen anything like it. It just looks so impressive. Steve now owns that car, and it's really great that he's now got the rally car version to go with it. All we need to do now is find the tow bar to go back on the road car and a trailer to put this car on. So here we have Subaru Impreza Group A 555 car. Probably the most iconic Subaru that existed, because it's the type of car that Colin won the World Championship in '95. So it was a team car from '96, driven by Kenneth Eriksson. He finished 4th overall in the World Championship in '96 with this car. Colin McRae finished 2nd in '96 after winning the championship in '95. There were 3 cars that wore famous number plates with the 555 cars. There was this one, which is N555 WRC, and then the other 2 team cars, which were L555 BAT and N555 BAT, which stood for British American Tobacco. Fantastic car. The 555 livery really, really stood out, and some people that know these cars will realise that when they went to different countries where they banned tobacco advertising, the 5s were taken off, and they actually used what we call the bananas to replace them as a different design, so it didn't have the tobacco advertising on. So here we have the Ford Escort Mark III RS Turbo. This particular car has actually only ever done 500 or so miles. It was built by the Boreham Works team, commissioned by Ford in the early 80s. The idea was they wanted to develop this car because they needed a car that was going to succeed the Mark II Escort. This car was their development car But what they did was they outsourced it. They built the car and then they gave some funding to a company called Mike Taylor Developments. They developed the car, but it was something that didn't really work. 1600cc front wheel drive turbo definitely didn't have the appeal to, you know, a normally aspirated 2-litre BDA rear wheel drive Mark II Escort. A completely different car, a completely different, you know, sound from the car. So it really was never going to be something that succeeded, and they were pretty unreliable and not very fast anyway. And so we move on finally to the Ford Fiesta R5 car. This is the most modern era of cars that we look after in Steve's collection. This car was actually bought for James to do some rallies over here in the UK. Sadly, with the current situation worldwide, it's something that's not been able to happen. We have been and driven the car in Wales on a couple of occasions with Steve and James. It's given them really an idea of you know, the scale. We've got 50 different years from the Mark I Lotus Cortina to this car. There's 50 years between them, so it gives them an idea of what's actually evolved over that time. This particular car was bought by or bought by us for Steve from Marco Martin Motorsport, who used to be one of the Ford Works teams drivers. Marco runs his own team in Estonia. The car came for sale and we wanted one, so it just made sense, as we'd got some collaboration with him in the past. It made sense for us to buy the car from him. What really stands out with these cars is the amount of suspension travel that a modern car has. These are almost twice as much as one of the older cars in a gravel specification like this. It gives you tremendous traction, tremendous braking, tremendous stability. The difference between, let's say, this car as a 2017 car and let's say the Colin McRae Focus, which is a 2001 car, is absolutely staggering. This car generally over a gravel rally stage would be a lot quicker, even though it doesn't have the power because it's only a 1600 versus a 2-litre. The difference in the chassis and the suspension is absolutely staggering. So that concludes our walk and talk around Steve's collection, which on a personal note, I would like to say that it's something that I'm extremely proud to be involved with. It started off, as we said at the beginning, with the Skoda World Rally car, and this is what's been created here in the UK. And it's actually lovely to know that it's given many people joy that when we've taken these cars to the events, that they can actually get up close and see them.
Thank you everybody for watching. Be sure and hit the like button and subscribe.